Hey, welcome back into a Level Deeper podcast. Chad back with you. And I've got a fun philosophical conversation that I had today that I'm excited to share with you. It was with my guest. His name is Mike Erwin. And I mean, just listen to this for a second. I almost get tired reading this. But Mike is the co-founder and chairman of Father Capodanno High School. He is the founder of the Character and Leadership Center. He is the co-author of two books, Leadership is a Relationship and Lead Yourself First. He's also working on a third book, which he will talk about in this conversation. He's the co-founder of the Positivity Project. He is the founder and executive director of Team Red, White, and Blue. He is also a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves. As if that wasn't enough, Mike also runs a 32-acre homestead and farm with his wife and his family. That is where they live in North Carolina. Mike is an incredible guy. I mean, to have the energy, the vision, the passion for all the different things that he is undertaking in life, I'm just fascinated by. It's something that inspires me, motivates me. And I think he's an example of someone who is aligned with what he calls his first principles. That's what he writes about in one of his books. He's clear and aligned on what his first principles are in life, and that helps guide him towards, as he says, these different bridges that he takes in his life to these different opportunities. We talked about the way his life is now isn't necessarily the vision that he had when he was younger, but how often is that really the case? And so we talk philosophically about operating within the gray and being in a very black and white world that forces us or rewards people to be and to speak and to think in very black and white ways, and yet us having the belief that the world is gray and things are often an and type of equation. And how do we go about navigating a very black and white world as gray thinkers? We talked about that word success. Mike's definition was interesting. And we talked about different societal versions of success and coming up against some of that. Mike tells some of the story of how he founded some of the organizations that he has created, like the Positivity Project, like Team Red, White, and Blue. We talk about this mission behind Team Red, White, and Blue around making sure that veterans' best days are ahead and what that means and how we can go about doing that. And I think it doesn't apply just to veterans. We bring it more general and more broad and apply it to all people. How do we take this mindset that, the glory days are behind us? And how do we craft the mindset that the glory days and the best days are still ahead? Anyway, it was just one of those really enjoyable conversations where we went deep into this human experience that we're all living and tried to dissect it and figure out elements of it. Mike said it helped kind of formulate some of his ideas that he will share in his next book. And so I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation with Mike Erwin. And it's next on A Level Deeper. What's the longest race you've ever done?
I did 91.1 miles on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. But that was kind of like start and stop throughout the night and then throughout the day. So then other than that, I've done 55. Well, I guess I've done double marathons. I ran San Francisco and Detroit through the middle of the night, got to the start line, and then ran the marathon. So I done 2.5 milers.
So I, like 4 or 5 months back, I started a running journey of my own. A lot of it was because I thought I hated running and I didn't think that I was capable of running long distances. I am curious to some of your approach. Like, why are you running a 91-mile race? And what is your mindset going into something like that?
Yeah, so my first one the only time I've ever done 91.1 was on the 10th anniversary of September 11th. So that was very, it was symbolic and significant. I was actually at West Point as a cadet in 2001 on the attacks of 9/11. And so I returned back there in 2011 as a teacher. As I graduated as Cadet Erwin, and then I returned as Major Erwin. And so that, was the driving factor behind that. The rest of them, doing long ultra marathons and marathons, a lot of it after I did the first couple on my own for no purpose other than to push myself, I realized that they're very inspiring to a lot of other people, and that it only made sense to then not just talk about me and my training plan and what I was doing and my Garmin stats and my heart rate. It gets very self-centered sometimes when you're training for something seriously. And so to put the focus on how can we use this as a chance to shed light on other people and helping other people really was my motivating factor behind that. Actually, there's a powerful story, Chad, going on right now. There's a guy named Paul Johnson. He's an active duty sailor in the Navy, and he's running across America in like 45 days. So he's doing about 60 to 65 miles per day, day after day. And the big thing that he's doing is he's doing this to raise awareness for Team Red, White, and Blue, and how the connection between physical activity and mental health is so powerful. We have so many people in society today talking about the mental health crisis, and there's lots of ways, from therapy to medication to meditation and yoga. There's all these various things that you can do to help you when you're struggling inside your ears. And ultimately, what I know from the research is that one of the most powerful and the most accessible things we can do when our mood is struggling, when we're frustrated, when we're sad, when we're whatever it might be, is to get out there and move our bodies. And that when we do that, there's a physical, there's a psychological, and there's a spiritual, right? And certainly there's a mental benefit that comes from that.
It's interesting as you're talking about some of the reasoning behind the running and it actually being other people focused. Mm-hmm. I know that was kind of the core principle behind Dr. Chris Peterson and the idea of positive psychology is that phrase, other people matter. I mean, that seems to be a phrase that permeates, as we talk about the Positivity Project, Team Red, White, and Blue. So many of the things, and that's only like a couple of the things that as I'm looking at your email signature, and there's like 7 things that you're either the co-founder of or you've written or you're involved in, this idea that other people matter and investing into other people and building these relationships, it seems to be a commonality of all these different things that you're involved in. Is that the case?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Part of it is, there's lots of reasons, and everyone comes at things from different angles based upon their background, their genetics, their upbringing, where they're at currently. So for me, there's a host of things that bring me to this. So one, I'm a lifelong Catholic, and so a big part of Catholicism, is to focus on other people. Jesus issued the Beatitudes, right? To clothe the naked, to visit the imprisoned, to give the thirsty water. So there's an element of that. There's an element agnostically, take out faith or religion out of it. There's an element that's very clear through the research of positive psychology that Chris Peterson and others led, which is that ultimately when we build relationships with others, when we help others, that it makes our life better, richer. And just, that's such a powerful finding. So regardless, because there's a lot of different faiths of the world, and regardless of whether you're an atheist or you're a daily Catholic or Buddhist or whatever your faith is, you can kind of almost set that to the side and say, okay, regardless of where I'm at there, here's the clear research. It's the same thing behind physical activity. There's no evidence out there that shows that consistent physical activity is bad for you. It's all upside. It's all positive. And when you help other people out, the only potential downside is that you could burn out, right? By just always helping other people out if you do so at the expense of yourself. But beyond that, it's all upside to investing in other people. And so everything I do is grounded on that of what can I do to help other people to be healthier, to be more connected, to know where their food comes from. Because I'm a homesteader, and so I've learned over the past 4 or 5 years how to raise food, livestock, and chickens, and a garden, and all those things. So everything for me really does come back to other people and my relationships with them. Because I know the research, I know it from my faith, but you layer those two things together, and it's the formula for me of how to live a happy, successful, fulfilling life that doesn't, even when you die, right, doesn't end with you, because it carries on with all the people that you've impacted.
What's your perspective on as the world becomes more digital and it feels like that type of connection that you're talking about maybe isn't happening in the same ways or at the same rate? I don't know, this perspective of being very other person focused and being very focused on developing relationships with people is the way that the society is going and the world is going. Is it moving us the opposite direction? Do we have to fight harder, more intentionally to create this type of connection with people?
Yeah, awesome question. And my short answer to that is yes. Your intuition, your assessment is accurate. I could take the rest of this podcast just talking about this one question, but people would fall asleep after a little bit. But so let me a couple of quick comments on that. Number one, in terms of building relationships in the information age, in the digital age, it is definitely for most people more challenging because it's noisier. There's more people pulling at us for our attention and for our input and to ask us to join them to be on certain projects or to do certain things. Like that is absolutely, a hard reality of the world that we live in today is that we're way more accessible. So therefore we're way more distracted. And if we have our phone around us or on us when we're playing golf with somebody or at dinner with somebody or on a run with somebody, like it distracts us from being fully present with that person or that group of people. And so that has definitely made it more challenging. Hence the title of the first chapter in my second book, Relationships Under Siege. But there's also this piece of the world in terms of marketing and speaking to people as individuals, with all the data out there that, they track our keystrokes. They track everywhere you go on the internet. It's tracked to your IP address and it's tracked to your phone and who are you in the vicinity of. And so big data has allowed companies, technology companies, but then through them marketers to be able to speak to us as individuals. And so whether that's giving us the news that we want to hear, right? Whether our politics are one way or another, whether we believe this or that, whether it's, you name it. It individualizes the life experience. The digital experience is not collective. It is individual. And so we often, if we're not careful, we don't even realize subconsciously, like this is just happening little bit by little bit, but we get more and more in our own narrow individual lane. And we forget that life's a team sport and that, yes, it's great that people are messaging me as an individual, or people are targeting me with ads, but that's not actually how the world works. That's how it works from a try to sell you stuff world lens, but that's not how the world works. And so both of those things, the noise and the competition and the distractions from people makes it harder to build relationships. And then increasingly, we have this individual focus driven by the way that big tech and marketing works in the world today.
So then what's the approach to get out of that mindset? If we're in this very individualized world, especially digitally,
mm-hmm.
how do we pull ourselves out of this individual space that we're existing in? And how do we get back into this idea that, oh yeah, we're supposed to be with other people. This is how we're supposed to be a team. How do we get back to that?
Look, it's a challenge. It definitely is. I think that one of the things, on this is there's a book called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. He's ironically a computer science professor at Georgetown University. He has a whole book helping people to declutter the digital noise in their life. Because the reality is when you study the brain and we look at dopamine and why is it that people are addicted to their phones and addicted to social media and addicted to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or whatever, it may be. It's because of dopamine, right? We really have become slaves to dopamine and we pursue those things that give us these little splashes and hits of dopamine. And so if you accept that logic that many Americans are essentially addicted to their phones, then you have to have a digital detox and a digital decluttering process that you go through so that you live your life differently. Like I don't have a television. We have one TV in our house, but we don't have cable. My phone has got only, I think, 30 apps total on it. I just get rid of lots of apps. So you have to make some bold decisions that are very countercultural. And we talk about this in Lead Yourself First, my first book. You've got to be willing to be countercultural and to be different and to be interpreted as, by some people, as being aloof. But you cannot live in this hyper-connected world on your phone all the time, plugged into social media all the time, tracking and streaming through your phone or through your iPad or through your television what's happening in the world all the time. Because no matter how hard you try, you're only going to get a very small amount of it. But that's the big way. You've got to be able to break free from kind of the shackles of the digital world that very much speaks to us as individuals. Now, how else? I think part of this is we've got to get people to experience, again, the power of being in real community. with people, having real experiences with other people, going to dinner with one another, going to a luncheon, going for a run, but not like with your phone and checking your email. All those things, like we've got to push for people to have more in real life experiences where they leave the technology and they leave the digital behind so they can really focus on the humans and the people that are in their vicinity at the time.
Hey, if you've been enjoying these conversations, I've got a request for you. In the description of this episode is a link to a site called Buy Me a Coffee. And if you follow that link, you can, well, buy me a coffee. You could buy me a coffee to support late night editing or early morning recordings and all of the work that goes behind the scenes to create this show. Consider it like a digital tip jar and a way for you to leave a one-time donation to the show to help support me and help support meaningful conversations like this. Anyway, if you head to that link to check it out and make a small donation, I would really appreciate that, and it helps keep this show going and cover the costs associated with producing it on a weekly basis. Your support means the world to me, so thank you very much in advance. Okay, back to the show. You mentioned this idea of being different. You seem like someone who is comfortable with that premise and idea of being different. Have you always had that approach? Have you always been that way?
Good question. I have always been, I would say, a little bit countercultural. The most obvious story of this I can remember is by the time I was a senior in my high school, I carried a lunch pail, to lunch. Like most people would either buy lunch or, I used to bring it in a brown bag, but I'm like, I'm going to bring it in a lunchbox because it just makes more sense. And if people are going to laugh at me, then so be it. But I had enough confidence in myself by that point that I could do it and I could shrug it off. So, I think that all of us have a streak, no matter who you are, at least a little bit of nonconformist in us. The question becomes, do you feed that? If it's a fire, right? Is it just a little fire or is it a big roaring fire? You've got to feed it oxygen. You have to read writing out there that encourages and promotes being different and living your life differently. And look, people have been writing about this for a long time. Ralph Waldo Emerson and like a lot of the great philosophers and writers. I took, Robert Frost, I think said, I was traveling the road and I came to a fork, right? And I'm going to mess up the quote, right? But I took the road less traveled and it has made all the difference. People have been saying this and talking about this for a long time, writing about it. Because a lot of our writers, like the Hemingways and the Frosts of the world, they were also philosophers. And so they've been talking about this stuff for a long time. And the Stoics way back, 2,000 years ago. And like when you go into it, like, again, bring it back to, again, to the Bible, Jesus Christ, like it was very much a nonconformist view of how you're supposed to live your life. So throughout history, whether it's religious or historical or philosophical, history has been shaped by the nonconformists. People who say, wait a minute, like the world's flat. Everyone just has been saying this forever. Like the first people who said, no, the world is round were ridiculed for a long time. So my point is that I think we can draw inspiration from studying history and people throughout history who were nonconformists, who said there's got to be a different way. There's got to be a better way to understand this or do this. But much easier said than done to actually do it because we are humans. We do look for the approval of other people, even though we want to think that we don't, even though there's a great book out now called The Fear of Other People's Opinions, by Dr. Michael Gervais. Right? There's a lot of people out there saying, stop fearing what other people think. Stop like looking at the comments on the social media posts. Don't worry about other people, but we're human and we do care. And so I don't subscribe to the idea that you can just like not care what people think. You have to care, somewhat what people think, but you have to care not too much what people think so that you can carve your own path and go your own way. And really the only way you get there is by being philosophical yourself. I just joined Ryan Holiday on his Daily Stoic podcast, and I described this like life is a thinking person's game. And you've got to be thinking like, where is it important that I have the acceptance and the approval of other people? And where is it that I'm okay being judged as being weird or different or like fear-mongering or fill in the blank with any sort of word out there? You have to know, where are you okay with that? And where is that actually a problem?
I really like that life is a thinking person's game. Do you think that comes down to like, I always think of it in terms of values. If I'm really clear on my values or the things that I value in life, then it makes it feel. I mentioned to you before we started recording. I'm recording this from a van, which I live in with my wife full time, and we travel the country, and my dog, who's currently on my lap. That's a very different decision.
Totally.
And I had people clapping for me, but I probably also had lots of people that were maybe silently scratching their heads and saying, why are you doing that? You had this college degree and you had a good job and you're kind of leaving all of that and you're pursuing this different lifestyle. I've always looked back on values being the thing of, if I'm clear on what I stand for and what I want in my life, then I'm willing to be different and reject some of other people's opinions if I'm feeling very in alignment with my values. Do you kind of see a similar approach? Is that the thing that helps us maybe find that balance or decipher when we should take in other people's opinions or not?
Absolutely. And there's no cookie cutter answer here. There's no answer key that tells you exactly when you should listen to other people's opinions and when you should ignore them. And that's the thing. We crave certainty as humans. Most people crave that certainty. And so they want answer keys. And there is no answer key here. So I think that's exactly correct. When you look at Lead Yourself First, Ray and I, my co-author, we talk about knowing your first principles and making sure that the decisions you make align with your first principles. And that tells you when you need to be nonconformist. Because, hey, my principles are A, B, C, and D, and this is who I am. You in many ways have like this almost like a 180 degree nonconformist approach that I do. I live on 32 acres. My wife and 5 kids, and I'm a homesteader. I've only learned this over the past 4 years. I had no idea what I was doing, but we're almost locked to our land. And so there's a downside for you and how you live, right? That you don't perhaps get to stay in one place that you might love for, as long as you might want, because you have to go somewhere else or you need to be somewhere. Or you just say, hey, I'm not going to spend too much time here. Whereas I, on the other hand, like my family, we leave as a family once, maybe twice a year. And when we do, it's a big event because we have to bring someone in to milk the cows and to take care of all the animals and to feed our dogs. And, it's not like, oh, put the dogs in the kennel, for a week and then come back and get them, or have someone come and feed them. It is a massive undertaking. And so here's an example of like, you can pursue what you've done. Because believe me, I look at people like you and other people out there who do this. I'm like, man, I would love that. Part of me would absolutely love that, to be able to be like a rolling stone, right? Free as a bird, kind of just going and exploring different parts of the country and seeing how different people live and all that. And there's part of me over here, which is that I'm a nonconformist in terms of how we eat. Like we have raw milk, we raise our own animals. Because I know that most of the food out there in the world, is not very healthy for you. And that we know everything that goes into the animals, when we feed them. And so again, like if you get too wed to one way or the other, it can be a challenge. And it does go back to your first principles and saying, hey, maybe for this season of life, I'm going to guess, I could be wrong, but you won't perhaps in 5 years be living in a van, right? And driving all over. Just like I might in 5 years not be living here, or I'll probably still be living here, but we might have turned this into a business and hire people to do some of the work, right? So that we don't have to worry about staying here, 358 days of the year. So again, first principles, knowing where you want to be in this chapter, in this season of your life, that's the stuff to get really clear on. And again, there's no answer key, and that's just something you got to make peace with.
I think that's always a great perspective as well. Thinking of life in chapters or seasons, I can easily get caught into thinking if I make a decision to live my life a certain way, I'm making it forever. This has to be the decision, and this is going to be, it's like it adds so much weight to every decision you make when you look at it with such a long-term approach. Whereas if you think about it from a seasons or chapters approach, it just feels like, well, this is my truth right now. This is what I'm experiencing. It doesn't have to always be. How did this chapter or this season of becoming a homesteader and having, living on 30 plus acres, tell me the story of how that came to be.
So I transitioned off of active duty to the Army Reserves in 2015. So a very nonconformist decision. I left at 13 years and 3 months of active duty service. So for a little bit of background, when you get to 20 years in the Army, you start collecting your pension right after you retire. So I walked away from guaranteed about $1.2 million because I can, as I finish my time in the reserves, I can start to collect my retirement at age 60, but I could have started collecting it at age 42. So for 18 years, I walked away from, $50,000-$60,000 a year, right? Which would have been nice from a security standpoint and from a predictability standpoint. But I did that because I did not want to be moved around every 2 years with my family in tow. And that was going to be a big challenge. So first principles, I said, well, this doesn't make sense to a lot of people, it makes sense to me. And so that's why I'm making the decision to get off active duty at 13 years in. So we moved back to North Carolina. We moved into the quaint, beautiful village of Pinehurst, which is this town founded in 1895. It kind of feels like New England in North Carolina, and tall, beautiful pine trees. It's glorious. A lot of people come here to retire. And so we lived there for 4 years. And after a while, I got to the point where I felt it was a little too comfortable, not just for me, but especially for my children, is that we were raising our kids and they couldn't go out and have a paper route like I did, or rake leaves, or snow blow driveways, or mow lawns. Those things that they've been outsourced to adults, or there's no need to really rake leaves or snow blow driveways here in North Carolina. So there's just limited opportunities for my kids to learn how to do work. And so, we started to look for, a little bit of land, but we also, a little bit, this was, I feel, God kind of like pointed us here, because a year earlier, 2 years earlier, we had started a private independent Catholic high school called Father Vincent Capodanno High. And we were looking for land for that. So that's the only reason why this property that I now live on even came up on our radar, was because we were looking for something that had at least 20 acres that we could potentially put our school on. And that's when we came out here and said, wow, like this is definitely not going to work for a school, but wow, this could be a really cool place to live. And so it was a little bit of, Holy Spirit intervention of like, hey, like this is a place that you could start to live and live a very different life than what you're living right now. But once we got out here for the past almost 5 years now, it's been a powerful experience. We came out here with no intentions to do anything other than maybe raise some chickens and have some land for our kids to play on. And ever since then, we got pigs, and then COVID struck, and then we got goats, and then we got turkeys, and then we got a dairy cow, and then we got a couple of beef cows. And before you know it, it's old MacDonald had a farm, so like it's been this fascinating journey for us. And sometimes you get places very intentionally, and sometimes you get there by catching a break or by moving in a direction that you may not understand in the current moment, but it then sets you up for that next big domino to fall. And you don't even understand it, And so again, from my view, like that's how God works, And so us, by starting this school, is really what even put this on our radar. And here we are 5 years later, all in, starting in COVID, really. So for the past 4 years, we've been all into this homesteading lifestyle, which is very nonconformist in the world today, because a lot of people just don't understand, why would you want to do all that work for your food when you can go to the store to buy it? And it's just been a very humbling but educational journey, to say the very least.
I got to imagine it's a actual. I don't know if going the whole farm route, but buying land is something that is interesting. That's my wife and I's ultimate vision as well. And who knows, it could turn into something like that. It's kind of interesting how we in different chapters of our life, we lean the opposite way. So it sounds like for 13 years and 3 months, a lot of your reality was you're moving around a lot. You're living a more mobile lifestyle. That's my current reality. It's hard to imagine in this moment not being in a lifestyle where we are moving around a lot. And yet we're thinking about, buying a bunch of land. And it's kind of interesting to hear you talk about the reality that means you're more tied down to a certain position. And so now you've gone sort of the opposite of what you experienced for 13 years. Totally.
Yeah, this is exactly the thing that life, going back to the idea of the seasons of life, we're in different seasons, very different season now than we were in, 5 years ago. And that's a big part of it. This will, perhaps instigate you to kind of dig into some of this more. But there's a great article, I think, in the New Yorker called "The Case Against Travel." It's really interesting because I was always a big traveler, right? Like I love traveling, and mostly in America. I'm not a huge international traveler, but I've been to Brazil and Netherlands and Switzerland and Germany and Canada and Mexico, but like, I've not been like all over the world, but I really enjoyed traveling and going to new places and new food and all that. There's this interesting group of philosophers, that over history have written about the problem with travel. And that it creates this restlessness in the soul that you've always got to be on the move, and that happiness is somewhere else other than where your feet are. And so again, I'm a high-end perspective. I see both sides. I see the problem with being in Moore County, North Carolina all the time, but my wife's cool with that. My work takes me on the road 7 days a month. And so like I still get out there and I get that itch is scratched for me, but I don't do like very much leisure travel at all anymore in this season of life. And so anyways, it's just this whole idea of there's not necessarily a right answer or a wrong answer. There's, I think, right answers and wrong answers maybe for certain chapters of life. There's right-ish answers and wrong-ish answers at other seasons of life. But it doesn't mean that your first principles change. You can be a big traveler and I think, see the whole country and live in the van, live in your van, right in this chapter of life, and then buy 5 acres and be anchored to it because you've already done that. Like, do you really need to keep traveling all over the world all the time? Like, I honestly don't. I've kind of done that. And so I know what it's like out there, and I've learned to develop a love of this property. We call it Grace and Glory Farms. I love being at Grace and Glory, and I enjoy it, and it's fulfilling and rewarding. And not just because my family's here, but the beauty of being in one place day after day, sleeping in your own bed and eating the food that you've helped to raise. All of that is a sense of fulfillment that I can't get by going on a plane and flying to Denver, Colorado, or Tampa, Florida, and going to the beach or going to hike in the mountains. For me, it doesn't even hold a candle to it. In this season of life at age 44, again, if I was at age 24, probably a different story.
I think some of it, I feel like in this digital sort of social media age, we like to make things very black and white. And, as you talk about life being a thinker's game, I think about how these situations they're very gray. And I think it's important that we recognize the and of these types of experiences. I'm traveling and living in a van. It's a very and type of experience. Yes, it's bringing me a lot of value. I love being new places. We've traveled to 47 states. Before I've hit the age of 30, we were in Alaska last summer and we're going back to Alaska this summer. So I'm getting experiences and I'm seeing things that I don't regret at all. And they're having a very big impact on me. And there are downsides to it. We talked about community, and staying in connection with people is very difficult living this lifestyle. And, especially because there's no consistency to where we're going, and we're not going to the local coffee shop or the local diner and bumping into people that we would see on a consistent basis. The community aspect is difficult. You get sort of untapped from society in some ways. So it's part of why I value this podcast. This is my opportunity, at least once a week to tap in with someone. But I think about how it's very much an and type thing. I feel like no matter what situation we're in, that's an important perspective to have, to be able to see both sides of it and recognize, yes, this is bringing me a lot of positive, but maybe there are some downsides to it as well, that a different situation could alter or be better or just serve me in different ways in the future.
100%. And that's not easy to do. A lot of people, they want to validate their way of life and the way that they're doing it. And it's called confirmation bias in the psychology world, where we look for things that affirm our decisions or our worldview or what we're doing or how we're living our life. We look for things that affirm that, and we kind of ignore the stuff that says, well, wait a minute, what about the downside of that decision? Because every decision practically has ups and downsides to it, almost every decision. And so it's not easy to do that, though, because we live in a world now where we feel like we often have to defend our view or how we're doing things to other people. And it can get a little bit tricky when the reality is in our head. We know that, like, no, there's some downsides, but I don't want you to know that. I don't want to let people onto that. Right? I want to keep that like inside my own ears or inside my own heart. I just want to focus on it because I want to market to the world that the way I'm living is awesome. So, for example, homesteading. There's a lot of people out there that look look at this almost like with some envy of like, wow, I wish I lived like that. I wish I lived, and had land and had animals and lived how you live. And I was like, yeah, like there, obviously I've made these intentional choices to live this way and for our family to live this way. But what you don't see is the fact that I got to go, kill a chicken that is got, an infection, or that we've got to deal with mastitis on a dairy cow and now milk her twice a day. So I don't share, and most people don't share the downside or the darker side of things nearly as much, because it would somehow contradict or undermine like what other people think of that style of life or what they're doing. And so for me, I try to, as often as possible, share the rainy days when it's rainy and cold out and you got to go do the chores. Like, the animals don't care. They need to be fed. They need to be let out. They need to have water. And so it's important, I think, to share some of that. And certainly in like the mobile community from who I've seen, a couple of people like Tommy Caldwell, the famous rock climber, has kind of lived like this. You see a lot of people being very envious of that same sort of thing of like, man, that's so amazing. I wish I had the courage to live like you or to go do that. But again, it's much more complicated than at the surface level.
In a lot of our process of building the van and getting on the road, we would hear the comment, and we still hear a lot of people saying, I'm jealous. Yeah. And that comment would often kind of rub me the wrong way, just because, I would say, well, are you jealous of the outcome of what you think, this is like, and what you think all of the experiences that I have are like? And like, yeah, it's cool. I have the freedom to, pick up, and if I want to go somewhere new today, I can go do that. It really is great. I've made a lot of intentional decisions to get here. But if you were aware of the process that it took to get here, right, and the things that I had to sacrifice, like a job and like stability and security and, choosing to go live on the road. And we built this van ourselves. It took us 4 months of working 10 to 12 hours a day. It's just kind of like, are you really jealous if you understood the entire picture? No. Or are you jealous of what you think, my lifestyle is like on a day-to-day basis now? And so that's always just kind of an interesting question and perspective.
Yeah. It's always more complicated than meets the eye. And in the world, say, where we move so fast, people just want to sort of simplify and boil it down into like a soundbite or to a meme or to, what they see on a social media post, right? It's just way more complicated than that. And that's the one of the many real downsides of the digital world.
Take me back to this version of Mike that's in high school. You're carrying your lunch pail around. What was your, I look at all the things that you're doing today. You've got your homestead farm. You have written a couple of books. You have founded a couple of organizations. You founded a high school. I mean, you're involved and you're doing so many things. This high school version of Mike carrying his lunch pail around, was this the vision that you had for your life? Is this kind of what you imagined, or was it different?
No, I think that very few people are fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, to have their life sort of charted out in their teens. There are some people, though, who are like, I want to be a veterinarian, and they know it from the age 11 or 12, and they work everything towards being a vet. They love working with animals. That's what they want to do. They want to be a vet tech, or they want to be a veterinarian. I think a lot of people discover their journey and their path as it unfolds before them. This phrase of you're building the bridge as you walk on it. I think that probably describes me pretty accurately. I actually wanted to be a doctor my whole life. From the time I was like 7 years old. What do you want to do? I want to be a doctor. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a doctor. I volunteered in hospitals for my community service, and I studied, and I loved biology and all that. And then my mom came home from work one day when I was a sophomore and said, hey, have you ever thought about going to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point? It's like 3.5 hours down the road because I'm from Syracuse, New York. And I said, I've certainly seen all the commercials, be all you can be, which is the theme of the Army campaign at the time. And I said, yeah, I'd be open to checking it out. And I went down there and just like fell in love. It was like, wow, like this is a very different place. Talk about a nonconformist decision. Most people go to college and they have all this freedom. They don't even know what to do with it all, right? After been living at home and now they have freedom. You go to West Point, you have less freedom than when you were at home, And so,
the opposite, yeah,
the opposite. So I made that decision pretty early on of like, wow, I've got to at least give this place a shot, because I will want to at least know if I could have made it here. And so, yeah, that was really like the journey that then said, okay, I guess maybe I'm not going to be a doctor, And then 9/11 takes place at the start of my senior year, and I choose to go military intelligence. as my branch because it was an intelligence failure. And so in many ways, the next target then opens and changes our perspectives and opens the world up to us in a different way. I would have thought for sure 5, 6, 7 years ago that I wanted to be a politician and be the governor of North Carolina, or run for Senate. Not just because politics is such a divisive place, but I don't think that's actually where I am called and where I would have the biggest impact, on the world that I want to have. And so what does that look like? I don't know yet, but I'm figuring it out. And so that to me is the thing about life is very few people have it figured out. And even if you do, it's that whole adage, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. You can have the best laid plans in the world. General Eisenhower said, plans are worthless. The planning process is priceless, right? So it's the process of planning and thinking that prepares you to respond. But ultimately, very few plans survive contact with the enemy. As Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? There's all these quotes about plans and essentially how, yeah, that's great that you got your plan. And then you come into contact with the enemy, or then you get hit in the face, right? Or then the enemy has a vote and does something and your plan really kind of goes out the window. But the question is, are you prepared for the next steps based upon did you plan or not? So to me, that's where I'm, kind of viewing it as I look back at my life to 1996, 97, 98 when I was in high school. And, I've just gone to different ridge lines and I go to West Point, then I go to become an intelligence officer. And that led me to starting Team Red, White, and Blue, which then opened my eyes to the fact that, I can serve others, not just in the military, but outside the military. Right. And then I learned positive psychology, which set the table for the Positivity Project, which then set the table for Father Capodanno, which then set the table for Grace and Glory Farm. So all of these things are like dominoes that fall. And when we're really present in where our feet are at, it creates that next opportunity that we can't even see 2 or 3 years down the road. And for me, that's part of the faith that I have, in being a person of faith, like these things are up to me to figure out. I have free will, but there is a degree of am I following God's plan for my life? And where I do, maybe not in the moment, but over time, things start to go really well. Right. And so to me, I just keep coming back to the idea of you can try to have this beautiful vision for your future. There's a very small chance that it's going to look like what you think it will 10 years down the road.
Talk to me about this process of, you talked about maybe wanting to go into politics and then feeling like that wasn't where you were feeling called and that maybe didn't line up with the vision that you had. How are you discerning that calling or that vision or whatever the feeling is that led you to believe, what, I don't think this is the right path for me. I think the path is supposed to be something else. How are you discerning that?
Part of it is what you and I just talked about a little while ago, that the world is gray. Almost everything is gray. And politics has become such a or B, an increasingly polarized world, and I think to me, it's not only there's a dissonance there with reality. Like in other words, because life is gray, to get elected and to be successful, you kind of have to pretend that it's not, and that it's all this way or it's all that way. And to me, as someone who's very much a gray thinker, a middle ground, a yes and guy, it's not either or, but it's both, right? Like if you're that kind of a thinker, politics has become a space. Going back to what we said at the very beginning about the digital marketing world and all the way to the world today, it's really about the individual and down to the individual level. So to me, I don't think currently how I view, and I don't think that I'm going to change. I don't think I'm going to be, become one way or another, A or B. Because of that, I don't, unless politics changes to become more of a gray and a middle ground space, I don't think there's a good alignment for me and who I am. A bit of a unifier, of bringing people together. I've got my strong convictions and beliefs, right? But I don't ostracize people because they see the world differently or live differently than me. But yeah, I do want people to see the world the way I do, right? About anything, about my faith, about homesteading, about fitness, about relationships, about everything that I work on. I want people to see that, but I don't ostracize people, right? And that's what politics basically does. If you're not with us, you're against us, and to me, that's a complete lack of humility if you think that Mike Erwin can fix that, right? We need something much bigger and more powerful to fix that problem than, a couple of individuals, right? Which is what people have been waiting for a long time. They're hoping there's going to be some like politician that's going to come along and like save America. It ain't going to happen, because of the way the world has become. And so for me, it's this question of where do I have the biggest impact pound for pound on society and on other people? And I don't have that answer right now, but increasingly I know what it's not. Right? And one of those things is politics.
Do you ever struggle with having a gray approach in a world that feels like it rewards black and white? Asking for a friend here, which would be myself.
Yeah.
My wife and I both run businesses, and I'd say we are very gray thinkers. And in the business that we run and the people that we help and support, we don't really speak in black and whites. We don't speak in absolutes. We don't speak in guarantees. And it feels at times like our businesses aren't growing as fast as other people's or succeeding as much as other people's because we're not using that type of language or having that type of approach. And sometimes, it pushes up against your principles and your values. And you have to ask yourself, what am I willing to potentially change or sacrifice in order to grow or wherever it may be? Do you find yourself struggling with something similar with the organizations that you lead and being this gray thinker when it feels like the world wants people to be black and white, is pushing people to be black and white?
It definitely is. And, I don't really struggle with it a whole lot because I've just come to accept the fact that if you don't play that game, that you're not going to get as many clicks or as many eyeballs or as many people who want to be in your corner. And so, or do business with you or join your organization or whatever it might be. So I think that you just have to accept you can't use the metric of how successful is our business or is my business or am I by comparing yourself to other people who are playing that game a lot better. And I think that, sure, at times maybe I'm like, oh man, it'd be surely easier to be more extreme or be A or B. But to me, like, that's not success. It might lead to more success monetarily or on a spreadsheet or on how the world views my success because of how much money I make. But that to me is philosophically not how I live my life. It's not how I assess myself. And so therefore, I don't struggle with it a lot, but it is tempting for sure to go more into one direction or another because it will bring more business or do more, to bring people into your orbit because, oh, I get that guy. Yeah, absolutely. So it's tricky for sure, but I don't struggle with it personally as much in this season of life.
How do you measure success?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the standard ways that people measure success is, wins and losses, test scores if you're a principal or if you're in school, in education, profits, veterans served if you're in team red, white, and blue. Like, so quantitative metrics do matter. To be clear, I am not suggesting that they are irrelevant. But I think that it's really more about the lasting effect on people's lives and how over time people grow to become, better human beings, more successful in their own right. Again, their definition of success can look different than mine for sure. So I'm much more of a qualitative than a quantitative guy. If I were to have to break it down, I'd say 80% qualitative, 20% quantitative. Because quantitative does matter in some regards. Like you need to earn enough money to be able to pay for your lifestyle and to do things, but and to save for the future and take care of your family. So that does matter. That's often tied to other key performance indicators, right? Like how many people are you serving? How many people are you selling to? All that stuff. But ultimately, I'm more of a qualitative person who's like, all right, hey, is this really working? Because sometimes the numbers will lie. Sometimes the numbers will make you feel like you're having this big impact and you're only kidding yourself, And so that to me is something that I've just learned to be okay with, I guess. That my definition of success is more qualitative. It's more looking in the mirror at night when I lay my head down on the bed at night. Like, how do I feel about what I did that day? How I lived my life, who I impacted, who I helped out, all that kind of stuff. So for that regard, I'm more on the squishier side, I guess you would say, on how I determine success. And so you got to be careful to not be delusional and be like, well, it feels successful to me, but the world's like clearly not saying so with, with how much money you're making or how many people you're serving. So you can't be delusional about it. There is a degree of like, you have to deliver on certain things, but I'm much more on the qualitative than the quantitative side.
So I had Jeremy Mitchell on the podcast earlier, and we talked about the Positivity Project. And so if you want to go back and listen to that episode about the Positivity Project, you can go do that. Mike, as our time comes to a close, I wanted to ask you about Team Red, White, and Blue. And, as I was listening to, I think it was the Where the Eagle podcast, a phrase stood out to me, which was, the mission is to make sure that veterans' best days are ahead of them.
Mm-hmm.
That felt like a powerful statement to me. I mean, how often is that not the case for veterans, that their best days are ahead?
I think for a lot of people in life, they've got that glory days mentality where like, oh man, it'll never be as good as it was in the 82nd Airborne Division. It'll never be as great as it was, back in high school when I was a letterman on the varsity football team, like kind of that like stereotypical mentality of like, it's just never going to get any better than that. And I think that as an optimist, like you always have to think that better days are ahead. And that you can keep growing and getting better as you go through life. Now, is it all linear? Of course not. There's setbacks and there's dips and there's drops and there's, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. Sometimes there's a little bit of that depending on the year that you're in or the season of life that you're in. But for a lot of veterans, they make a lot of sacrifices when they're on active duty, the National Guard or the reserves. They might live, you might call it fast, right? You're not training hard and like putting stress on your body and sleeping on the ground. You're partying and, you're not getting enough sleep because you're younger, all those things. But especially if you go to combat, right, you're potentially putting your safety on the line, your life on the line, and definitely your health on the line. You jump out of airplanes or you fire big cannons and it can hurt your ears. So there's all these things that are done in the name of selfless service. Or servant leadership in the military. And that's part of why the military is a profession, the profession of arms. It's a calling. It's not just a job if done properly. And so when a lot of those men and women leave that and then go back to civilian life, they go back home, they go back to settle in a new part of the country or the world, they often bring some of that selfless service mentality with them. And while you're in the military, you have to exercise. And when you leave, all of a sudden, that now becomes a personal decision. And so a lot of veterans struggle to have the discipline after for 3 to 30 years, they had to exercise daily because the military made them. They're like, all right, I'm taking a break. I don't need this in my life, and that's fine for a week or even a month. But if you go a year, you go multiple years and like you just stop exercising, that's a big problem. Right? We need to stay physically active, not just for the physical benefits on our heart and on our health, but on our mental health, on our emotional health, the ability to work through problems and stress. And there's a coping mechanism, all the things, all the benefits that come from moving our bodies. And so that's really what we do is we build a community at the national level, all the way down to the local level where you wear this shirt, you wear this eagle, you signify that I'm a member of this tribe, this team. It gives you an immediate personal or relationship connection when you see someone else wearing this eagle. There's also all the programming that we do that drives veterans to make healthier decisions and to live better lives. And to me, that is super important. It's why I started the organization 14 years ago and why, I hope it's really here for decades, if not centuries.
Yeah, well, it's a great mission. And so thank you for sharing that. Thank you for investing time with me today. I'm going to include in the show notes for people listening links to all of the organizations that Mike has talked about. I'll provide links to Mike's book. Mike, if people wanted to find you or get in touch with you, what are some ways that they could do that?
Simplest is on LinkedIn. I'm on Erwin RWB on both Instagram and on X. But yeah, I put stuff out there on different platforms talking about these ideas further. Working on a third book right now. It's kind of along these lines of the grayness of life. So some of that's becoming more and more clear to me. So even podcasts like this and conversations with you and fellow thinkers that are in that space of the gray help me to refine the thinking and the message of the book. But in the meantime, really appreciate the opportunity to have this great conversation with you and unpack these big ideas that are important to so many of us. And hopefully those that carve out this hour to listen to the podcast are a little bit better for it.
Great. Well, I feel like I'm better for it. So thank you again for investing time with me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad.
Hey, thank you for tuning into this episode of A Level Deeper, my conversation with Mike Erwin. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you feel like there's someone who might also benefit from hearing this conversation, I ask you to just take a moment to share it with them. Send them a text, send them an email, send them a link on social media. Sharing this show is one of the best ways for us to reach new people and to grow it. And if you have been listening to the conversations and enjoying them, or if you like this one today, consider taking a moment to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Similarly, it helps showcase the value of this show to potential new listeners. Thank you for being here. If you want to connect with me, send me an email directly, chadmmiles@live.com. Or you can head to my Instagram @ChadMMiles, and you can join some of the conversation around this show with Mike Erwin and some of the previous episodes as well. Connect with other listeners. Anyway, I invite you to come join any of those opportunities. And lastly, if you have been enjoying these conversations, it would mean a lot to me if you made a small donation to the show. You can do that through the link to buy me a coffee. That is in the show notes. It sounds as simple as it is. It's a platform where you can make a small donation that, buys me a coffee to help support the creation of this show, which is a small independent podcast that I run from my van. Anyway, I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did too. I look forward to sharing another one with you next Tuesday, and we'll see you then.